I've only known my language and the world that I was brought in. And it's a mixture of, the being put into a colonial system that draws you away from your community, moving off the land for the first time, and the adjustments to the non-adjustable systems that were in place at the time, that we were continually corralled into places where we didn't want to go, or where we didn't want to be systemized, where the only food source that we had available to us has somehow been regulated to a point where you could no longer access those animals. And those were very tough years in the old days for the older people, because that's all they depended on.
So you can make your living doing some work and people are going to pay you, and then you give that money that you made to someone else so they can give you heating fuel or food, and then you survive. Or you could just cut out that middle part and just go out there and do the work to cut wood to heat your house, or like shoot something and get food, right? The big difference between that is that when we make our living by going on the land and cutting out that middle part, those things that we do to make our living, those relate to our rights, and those are things that we do have to take very seriously, because if we don't have the ability to do that in the future, we may not be able to survive.
Traditional knowledge and the ways of the old world, being aware that there's a disconnect between that world and the world that we live in, that there's no real relationship. And if you don't have a recognition of a relationship, then it becomes very one-sided, and it leaves a big population of people behind in very many ways. And so UNDRIP is a tool that was developed over many, many years.
UNDRIP is a document that has 46 articles that describe a whole variety of rights. Things like self-government and self-determination, rights to land and resources, education, media, intellectual property. So UNDRIP is really a more modern perspective of Indigenous people's rights and abilities to make decisions for themselves and their own communities and their own land. And I think people need to be educated on that so that we can start moving into that modern perspective of Indigenous self-determination.
We're talking about reconciliation. We're talking about re-strengthening. We're talking about resourcing for the first time. We're talking about giving recognition for people to make their own decisions and to have an impact into the ways programs are being delivered. And so those laws and policies don't change overnight because of the will of laws or policies, but it's about how to do the implementation. The North, in its uniqueness, can do unique things. The opportunity to do something with it in the North is very real because of the makeup of government of the Northwest Territories. It's always been a good representation on both sides. But the problem has always been that the system hasn't allowed for this new information. And so that's why the action plans that governments have embarked on is a clear view of where they would be headed to. And so it's important to be involved.
One key benchmark of progress, one thing we can say, here's an indicator we're making real progress on this, is around those issues of free, prior, and informed consent. And that basically means that government needs our permission. They need to come to us and try to get our permission before they do something that might impact our rights. And so that would include things that impact our land. I think if we can get to that point where free, prior, and informed consent is actually being done and required by the government of the Northwest Territories and the government of Canada, then we can really say we've made progress on implementing the declaration.
With our languages as well as the common languages in Canada, we find new ways of approaching our dialogue to ensure that what we have been doing in the past doesn't continue to be done into the future. We're looking at becoming part of a new way of doing business without having to leave the original people behind. Restoring our involvement. How do we reconnect back to who we were and all the things that are related to land, language, culture, and way of life? We need to do an exercise of strengthening on our part at the community level, so that we have a basis for making inroads.
It's important for people to pay attention to how government treats them and their community, but I think it's also important for people to just go out there and learn their language and use their language, to go out there on their land and enjoy their land. The whole UN Declaration is meaningless if we're not actually practicing our rights.